Hey, welcome back! It's time for our final episode of Beowulf as we conclude this epic hero story. When we last left off, Wiglaf was holding Beowulf as he died. And he had that moment where he wanted to see the gold one last time. And so now we have to deal with the aftermath of Beowulf's death. What's going to happen to the Geats? What's going to happen to Wiglaf? What's going to happen to the treasure? Now that Wyrd has finally caught up with Beowulf. In line 2845, all of Beowulf's friends who ran away and hid in the woods during the fight return. Before long, the battle dodgers abandoned the wood, the ones who had let down their lord earlier, the tail turners, 10 of them together. When he needed them most, they had made off. Now they were ashamed and came behind shields in their battle outfits to where the old man lay. They watched Wiglaf, sitting worn out, a comrade shoulder to shoulder with his lord, trying in vain to bring him round with water. Much as he wanted to, there was no way he could preserve his lord's life on earth, or alter in the least the Almighty's will. What God judged right would rule what happened to every man, as it does to this day. This sense of providence. And Wiglaf is, in some ways, trying to fight against providence, as if by bathing Beowulf's wounds, even though he's already dead, he can somehow change the outcome of the battle. And Wiglaf, in his frustration and rage, stands up and chews out the runaways. Wiglaf, son of Wehosten, spoke disdainfully and in disappointment. Anyone ready to admit the truth will surely realize that the Lord of Men who showered you with gifts and gave you the armor you are standing in, when he would distribute helmets and mail shirts to men on the mead benches, a prince treating his thanes in hall to the best he could find, far or near, was throwing weapons uselessly away. It would be a sad waste when the war broke out. Beowulf had little cause to brag about his armed guard, yet God, who ordains who wins or loses, allowed him to strike with his own blade when bravery was needed. There was little I could do to protect his life in the heat of the fray, yet I found new strength welling up when I went to help him. When my sword connected and the deadly assaults of our foe grew weaker, the fire coursed less strongly from his head, but when the worst happened, too few rallied around the prince. Their betrayal has ultimately led to the death of Beowulf. But Wiglaf goes on and begins to predict what's going to happen next. So it is goodbye now to all you know and love on your home ground, the open-handedness, the giving of war swords. Every one of you with freeholds of land, our whole nation, will be dispossessed. Once princes from beyond get tidings of how you turned and fled and disgraced yourselves, a warrior will sooner die than live in a life of shame. As soon as all of our enemies hear how you all are cowards, we're going to be overrun. Our great hero and king and warlord, Beowulf, is dead, and all of his friends are obviously cowards. There's no way we're going to be able to support our nation anymore. At this point, we cut to a messenger who is bringing the news to the Geats in general, all of the people. And the messenger rides to the cliff top and announces to the people the tragedy and what has happened. Beowulf is dead, and the dragon is dead, and there sits Wiglaf. And now, again, there's a sense of doom. Wyrd is coming. Now war is looming over our nation. Soon it will be known to the Franks and the Frisians. Far and wide the king is gone. Hostility has been great among the Franks since Hygelac sailed forth at the head of the war fleet into Friesland. There where Hertwir harried and attacked and overwhelmed him at great odds. The leader in his war gear was laid low, fell amongst followers. That lord did not favor his company with spoils. The Merovingian king has been an enemy to us ever since. Nor do I expect peace or pact-keeping of any sort from the Swedes. Remember at Ravenswood, Augentheow slaughtered Haeson, Hrethwul's son, when the Geat people in their arrogance first attacked the fierce Shiflings. The return blow was quickly struck by Othier's father. Old and terrible, he felled the Sea King and saved his own aged wife, the mother of Onela and of Othier, bereft of her gold rings. And so we have all of these forces around us, the Franks and the Frisians. Remember our old battles with them back when Hygelac was king? That led to the death of Hygelac, and we've had these recent conflicts with the Swedes. With all these enemies around us, now that our lord is dead, you know conflict is coming. peace is over. And as is often true of the poetry of Beowulf, the messenger tells this lengthy story of the battle between the Geats and the Swedes, and what happened with Ogynthiau, how he was slain in the battle. And it's an intense, about 3 pages of description of Ogynthiau fighting against Ulfr and Wolf, and this battle back and forth, and Ogynthiau's beard is dripping with blood, and they're attacking each other back and forth, and finally Ogynthiau falls, and they take his armor. But because Ogynthiau was such a great leader of the Swedes, and so beloved of them, now that Beowulf's gone, now that we no longer have a strong leader, we can expect some retaliation. So this bad blood between us and the Swedes, this vicious feud, I am convinced, is bound to revive. They will cross our borders and attack in force when they find out that Beowulf is dead. In days gone by when our warriors fell and we were undefended, he kept our coffers and our kingdom safe. He worked for the people, but as well as that, he behaved like a hero. And so the messenger calls the Geats to come look at the fallen Beowulf and the fallen dragon, and also the treasure hoard that he has rescued. It's time to have a funeral for their beloved leader Beowulf. And in the funeral, they plan to pile the gold on top of him and burn him with it. His royal pyre will melt no small amount of gold, heaped there in a hoard. It was bought at heavy cost, and that pile of rings he paid for at the end with his own life will go up with the flame, be furled in fire. Treasure no follower will wear in his memory, nor lovely woman link and attach as a torque around her neck. But often repeatedly, in the path of exile they shall walk bereft, bowed under woe, now that their leader's laugh is silenced, high spirits quenched. Many a spear dawn cold to the touch will be taken down and waved on high. The swept harp won't waken warriors, but the raven, winging darkly over the doomed, will have news, tidings for the eagle of how he hoked and ate, how the wolf and he made short work of the dead. So we're not going to get any pleasure out of this treasure. We're going to pile it on Beowulf's body and burn it with him on his pyre, and then create the barrow. And he ends with this dark imagery of ravens and wolves eating up the dead, because we're all doomed now. Without Beowulf, we're toast. Weird for everyone. Such was the drift of the dire report that gallant man delivered. He got little wrong in what he told and predicted. This is really dooming kind of statement here. Yeah, everybody's being really pessimistic, but you know what? They're not wrong. And so all the Geats get up and they go to Beowulf. And as they approach him, they see this huge hulking dragon dead on the ground there. And yeah, it's a big dead dragon, but now it's just a dead creature, and they're able to just roll it off the cliff into the ocean. But then they approach the treasure. It's almost as though the treasure has a kind of life beyond the dragon. We talked a little bit about the treasure last time. Beowulf was excited to see the treasure one last time, or he desired to see the treasure one time before he fully died, because he wanted to see what he had won in fighting the dragon. And that almost seemed like a touch of greed. And yet, he goes out thinking, I've provided my people with this wonderful treasure as I die, so they'll have something at least to help them in the future when I'm gone. But we see that it's not going to help them. In fact, this treasure has a curse on it. It seems that dragon treasures tend to do that. There's also a curse on the treasure of Fafnir in the story of Sigmund and Siegfried. Beside him stood pitchers and piled-up dishes, silent flagons, precious swords eaten through with rust, ranged as they had been while they waited their 1,000 winters underground. That huge cache, gold inherited from that ancient race, was under a spell, which meant no one was ever permitted to enter the ring hall unless God himself, mankind's keeper, true king of triumphs, allowed some person pleasing to him, and in his eyes worthy, to open the hoard. So this hoard could only be opened by someone worthy. Is Beowulf that worthy person? Is he the one who's allowed for the opening of this hoard? Well, the people are allowed to see it, but then they close it back in and they bury it. They burn a lot of it with Beowulf, and they bury all the rest under his barrow. What came about brought to nothing the hopes of the one who had wrongly hidden riches under the rock face. First the dragon slew that man among men, who, in turn, made fierce amends and settled the feud. Famous for his deeds, a warrior may be, but it remains a mystery where his life will end, when he may no longer dwell in the mead hall among his own. So it was with Beowulf. When he faced the cruelty and cunning of the mound guard, he himself was ignorant of how his departure from the world would happen. The highborn chiefs who had buried the treasure declared it until doomsday so accursed that whoever robbed it would be guilty of wrong and grimly punished for their transgressions, clasped in hell bonds and heathen shrines. Yet Beowulf's gaze at the gold treasure when he first saw it had not been selfish. The interpretation of these lines has been heavily debated for many years. There is a curse upon the gold that anyone who tries to acquire it will not be allowed to do so, or will be cursed to be horribly doomed, even dragged down to hell. And yet, Beowulf, as we've seen throughout the story, because of his heroism, because he does all things with both an acceptance of Wyrd and an acceptance of Providence, because he does things generously and selflessly, has been allowed to descend into hell in the past and come back, as in the moment he descended down into the pit to fight Grendel's mother. He's been able to face off on evil over and over and over again. And in this moment, this imagery of being dragged down to hell might mirror the Christ imagery. After all, in defeating Satan, Christ goes down into hell and then breaks free, but then bursts the bonds of death and redeems the people. There's a lot of mirrors here, but it's complicated because the Geats are not necessarily redeemed. Yes, they've stopped the plague of burning fire from the dragon, but now they're doomed. There's no hope for the future. Although Haney clearly interprets the line that Beowulf's glance at the gold had not been selfish, the Old English is much more vague than that. Chickering translates it, "None the more readily had he earlier seen the gold-bestowing kindness of the owner." There is some litotes going on here, but it's hard to know exactly which way the irony leans. Is it that Beowulf's glance at the gold was sincere and honest and pure because he was thinking of how it was going to his people? Or is Beowulf himself affected by this curse? Tolkien, on the other hand, feels the very negative connotation of the irony here. He translates it, "Alas, Beowulf, ere he went, had not more carefully considered the old possessor's will that cursed the gold." Is it merely that the curse of the gold brought about the end of Beowulf's life, but Beowulf's pureness of heart kept him safe? Or is it something more dire? Immediately after this, Wiglaf makes another negative comment about Beowulf. He says, "Often when one man follows his own will, many are hurt. This happened to us. Nothing we advised could ever convince the prince we loved, our land's guardian, not to vex the custodian of the gold. Let him lie where he was long accustomed. Lurk there under earth until the end of the world. He held it to his high destiny. The hoard is laid bare, but at grave cost. It was too cruel a fate that forced the king into that encounter." So Wiglaf says, I wish we could have changed Beowulf's mind. I wish he hadn't gone up against the dragon by himself. It marked his doom. It's going to mark our doom. Was it the curse of the gold that brought all this about? Then Wiglaf repeats the last things that happened between him and Beowulf, how he presented Beowulf with the gold, how Beowulf asked for a barrow, and so then Wiglaf leads them down into the treasure room, where they take the treasures and go pile them on Beowulf's body. Now shall flame consume our leader in battle, the blaze darken round him, who stood his ground in the steel hail. When the arrow storm shot from bowstrings pelted the shield wall, the shaft hit home, feather-fledged, it finned the barb in flight. He selects 7 friends, they carry the gold up, and they light the pyre. And there is this heartbreaking funeral, which mirrors the funeral we saw at the very beginning of the book. You remember at the beginning of the book we saw the funeral of Shield Chieftain, how he was laid out in the boat and pushed out into the ocean, and he had all this treasure piled on top of him. Beowulf also has treasure piled on top of him, and he's on a pyre, and they're about to burn his body with all of this treasure, and then build a barrow, a big mound over it. And yet, the feelings are very, very different. The mood is extremely different from the beginning to the end. People were grieving over the loss of their lord, but there was a sense of security. He had a son who was noble and brave, ready to take over, Beo. But now, as Beowulf dies, he has no son, and the people are foundering. They were disconsolate and wailed aloud for their lord's decease. A Geat woman, too, sang out in grief. With hair bound up, she unburdened herself of her worst fears, a wild litany of nightmare and lament. Her nation invaded, enemies on the rampage, bodies in piles, slavery and abasement. Heaven swallowed the smoke. Then the Geat people began to construct a mound on the headland, high and imposing, a marker that sailors would see from far away, and in 10 days they had done the work. It was their hero's memorial. What remained from the fire they housed inside it, behind a wall as worthy of him as their workmanship could make it. And they buried torques in the barrow, and jewels and a trove of such things as trespassing men had once dared to drag from the hoard. They let the ground keep the ancestral treasure, gold under gravel, gone to earth, as useless to men now as it ever was. Then 12 warriors rode around the tomb, chieftains' sons, champions in battle, all of them distraught, chanting in dirges, mourning his loss as a man and a king. They extolled his heroic nature and exploits, and gave thanks for his greatness, which was the proper thing. For a man should praise a prince whom he holds dear, and cherish his memory when that moment comes when he has to be conveyed from his bodily home. So the Geat people, his hearth companions, sorrowed for the lord who had been laid low. They said that of all the kings upon the earth, he was the man most gracious and fair-minded, kindest to his people, and keenest to win fame. He is a hero of heroes, and we have the 12 mourning him again. Like I said, there's lots of Christ figure imagery, but there's also some questions about how things close here. It certainly ends in the very Anglo-Saxon way of a sense of weird and doom. Throughout the story, Beowulf is able to do so many heroic things. He's able to demonstrate to us many ideas about leadership which are still relevant. Sure, you don't necessarily go arm wrestle monsters with your life, but avoiding selfishness and greed, doing things out of a desire to help other people and strengthen other people, as well as understanding that at any moment things unexpected can happen and completely change the course of your life. All those are still very, very valuable things to hold on to and understand. And Beowulf, as a hero who fights against all the monsters of life, the monsters of Beowulf's world seem to reflect and symbolize some of the big struggles and problems that they're going through. Whether it's Grendel with the unexpected, surprising monster that jumps out at you, the violence of the culture, or whether it's Grendel's mother, the vengeful family member bent on blood feud, or whether it's the dragon, the curse of greed, and a lust for gold and power. All of those things can drag you down. I like Beowulf because it's about taking the problems of life head on. Sometimes we have to rush into the depths and fight those monsters, but we also have to keep our minds and our hearts clear in the midst of our battles. Thanks for watching. Thanks for studying Beowulf with me. You can click to subscribe to watch another video, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.